Single acts of tyranny may be ascribed to the accidental opinion of the day, but a series of oppressions begun at a distinguished period and pursued unalterably through every change of ministers to plainly prove a deliberate, systematic plan of reducing us to slavery. Thomas Jefferson. Single acts of tyranny may be ascribed to the accidental opinion of the day, but a series of oppressions which begin at a distinguished period and continue through changes of ministers prove a deliberate, systematic plan of reducing us to slavery. When the people fear their government, there is tyranny, and when the government fears the people, there is liberty. I want you to compare that with DHS funding of white boxes that track the populations of entire cities, of an NSA that is monitoring and tracking everything that you do, whether online or offline, whether you're through your desktop phone, your mobile phone, your home phone, the one that hangs on the wall in your kitchen. They're photographing every piece of mail that goes through the U.S. Postal Service. You're being forced to submit and give your information to the government by one law that violates two of your constitutional enumerated, outlined Bill of Rights. The first is the Fourth Amendment against search and seizure, unlawful search and seizure of you and your personal effects and your things. Part of your things is your information, your identity information, your taxation information. You have the right to privacy. And yet you're being forced by the passage of a law to give that up. And you're giving it up when the notice on Obamacare's healthcare.gov website, and many of the states, all of the states actually, say that you are submitting this information and it may be used for auditing and investigation and criminal and civil prosecution. So therein, now they're violating your Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination with a law passed 3 years ago against the law that passed the moment nature came into existence. Now you tell me which one has more weight. These new boxes are popping up all over downtown Seattle. And they have a little antenna on the top. And wherever you go with your hip-mounted tracking device, your cell phone, they are recording the last 1,000 locations that you have been using the GPS chip in your tracking device. They use the MAC address in your cell phone, which is not changeable. It's not like an IP address that can change based on who the provider is. The MAC address is hard-coded into the circuit board in your phone. And it's unique as it's a unique identifier like DNA or a fingerprint. The Department of Homeland Security is funding this at a cost of $2.7 million. They've also cooperatively funded the implementation of light poles in Las Vegas. Street light poles. And on these street light poles, they have cameras and they have microphones. And those microphones are sensitive enough to actually pick up conversations being held in the street. in Detroit, I'm sorry, not Detroit, in Baltimore and in Washington, D.C., they're putting a series, a mesh network. Think of a mesh like a fishing net, right? Where each point where fabric connects to fabric is a point. And they're putting up these mesh networks of microphones around the city that when they hear a gunshot can triangulate, as long as they've got at least 2, but preferably 3 or more microphones that can hear that sound, and they can triangulate exactly where it came from down to a few yards. The report, which is by a magazine or a weekly newspaper in Seattle, says that the boxes that are attached to these utility telephone poles and light poles include a vertical antenna, and they can track your cell phone even if you're not connected to the Wi-Fi network. Aruba Networks, that's the company that actually provides the hardware for this, to the Seattle Police Department, who got this system paid for by federal tax dollars through the Department of Homeland Security, the new KGB, the new Stasi. They brag in their technical literature about how these boxes can keep track of, quote, rogue and unassociated devices. In other words, that's your cell phone if you have refused to let the system access the Wi-Fi capabilities of your phone. So even if Wi-Fi is off, their system can track you. It says in their user guide, the wireless network has a wealth of information about unassociated and associated devices. That means those that have Wi-Fi turned on and Wi-Fi turned off. The software includes a location engine that calculates associated and unassociated device locations every 30 seconds by default. And the last 1,000 historical locations are stored in the chip on the board that is identified by the fingerprint, by the DNA of the MAC address. There were a couple of reporters who asked the Seattle Police Department and the DHS to explain what they wanted the boxes for. DHS refused to comment. The guy from the Seattle Police Department would only say that the department is, quote, not comfortable answering policy questions when we do not yet have a policy. You got to be kidding me. So you've installed these programs. You've installed these boxes. You've installed a massive tracking and surveillance system, and you don't even have a policy as to what and how and under what circumstances it can be used, who it can be used against, what you're seeking. Ladies and gentlemen, if that is not government run amok, I don't know what is. In other words, all we know is we can track you. We're not quite sure how we're going to use it yet, and because we're not sure how we're going to use it, we can't give you any assurances that we won't abuse it. I mean, one statement logically tells us what their real statement is. Their real statement is, their verbal statement was, we're not comfortable answering policy questions when we do not yet have a policy. Translated, that means we don't have a policy. So basically, everybody's game, all things are on the table, we can do whatever we want. That's exactly what it means. This guy went on to add that the mesh network could not be used for, quote, surveillance purposes without city council approval and an appropriate court authorization. Well, first of all, who is the city council to force your Fourth Amendment right to be violated? Oh, I get it, they're elected, but they're not elected to be your prisoner or to be your jailer and you to be their prisoner. They're elected to work on your behalf, not on behalf of your demise. funny that they didn't say that the mesh network couldn't be used for surveillance functions, only that it wouldn't be used that way, which tells you that it can be. So basically what you got is a backslap and a trust me. They're justifying it by saying it'll allow cops and firefighters and first responders to communicate as well as stream surveillance video on a private, uncluttered network during an emergency. In Las Vegas, they're putting speakers on there so that while they're observing you and listening to your conversation, somebody in Big Brother Central can say, "Excuse me, citizen down there on the street, put away that alcohol bottle." You've got to be kidding me. Are we in the land of Oz or what? Citizen. Citizen. Yes, I mean you, citizen. Lay down on the ground and await arrival of authorities, citizen. It's like out of a science fiction movie. 1984. Come to life on steroids. Citywide deployment covering 650,000 people. Really? One of the city council members says, "I understand that a lot of people have concerns about the government having access to this information. When we have a large public gathering, like the situation like in Boston, and something bad happens, the first thing we want to know is, how are we using technology to capture that information?" Another guy says, "We're being told that such measures will help police solve more crime. We're being told that such measures will help keep people safe. But what about our privacy? Doesn't that count for something? What about the Fourth Amendment? Are the most cherished liberties and freedoms going to be thrown into the trash just because we live in a, quote, more dangerous world?" I think that's some valid and legitimate questions, don't you? The IntelliStreets, that's what they're calling these programs. IntelliStreets. You see, signal intelligence, or SIGINT as it's called in the military, isn't just for the military anymore. Now SIGINT is directed at you. The company who's behind the IntelliStreets claim that they can analyze voices, act as surveillance cameras, and make loudspeaker security announcements. They have the ability and the capability to track people who wear RFID tags. Hello. The lights are all linked back to a central data hub via this Wi-Fi network, and they have the same capability and capacity to track people via the cell phone MAC address. Well, with all due respect, your cell phone MAC address is an RFID chip. It's no different because it's a unique identifier that cannot be duplicated or replicated, so there's only one of them. And if that phone belongs to John Smith, then John Smith is the guy that we're tracking. Watch and wait and see how they utilize this in a court of law. A court of injustice. 70 major U.S. cities have deployed ShotSpotter. That's the program I was telling you about in Detroit and D.C. But 70 major cities have deployed it. It's designed to alert authorities if there is a gunshot. but it also has the ability to record conversations. Interesting. The ACLU is out there talking about it, rightly so. They're warning that the technology represents a clear violation of the Fourth Amendment if misused. Well, let me tell you something. The fact that it exists is a misuse. The fact that the capabilities are there is an abuse and a misuse and a violation of not only your Fourth Amendment right, but remember, the Constitution doesn't grant you those rights. Those rights were granted to you by your Creator, by God, and by natural law and nature's God. And no rule of man can override those universal rights that exist despite all the best intentions of those people who would subjugate you into slavery and domination. You can't loophole natural law. You can't loophole God's law. You can't loophole God's granting of your individual rights to privacy, security, the worship, your freedom of speech, your freedom to move about and do as you choose, your freedom to benefit from the fruits of your labor, your right to privacy, your right to self-defense. There's no end run around that, ladies and gentlemen. You can pass all the laws you want, but they have no more weight, no more bearing than a law that would say legalize murder. We are looking at a surveillance grid in the United States of America that would put a Cheshire cat grin on the face of every domineering tyrant who has ever existed in history. Because with ubiquitous capabilities to track individuals, listen to your conversations, store the data, when someone comes under suspicion, it's easy enough to go back in and look at all their stuff, find something, even if you have to pull it out of context, and make it look like something it's not. Apply the pressure, the coercion. Even the most innocent of us will begin to change our behavior and our interactions with our fellow men, our families, our friends, our brothers, our sisters, our co-workers, our church leaders, our church congregants. When listening in and watching is so ubiquitous that the entire planet is a reality TV show watched by a few monstrous and vacuous machines for later replay on the DVR of whatever tyrant's in charge. Let me tell you something. If you want to live in a world like that, that's up to you. But if you don't think that that's going to change everything about our nature, when everybody is afraid to speak of anything because somebody's listening, I don't care if you didn't mean it that way. Somebody could take it the wrong way. Shh, Charlie, don't talk like that. Don't say those things. Somebody's listening. Please don't put your arm around me. Somebody's watching us. Tell me it won't change you. Tell me it hasn't already changed you. if you want to play in the arena of self-deceit, you go right on ahead and do that. But I guarantee if you sit back and think about it, you will see that it has already changed you. You've been listening to America's Voice Now. My name is Michael Evans, and I seek change. But I seek change to enhance your liberty, enhance your freedom, enhance your self-determination, your self-governance. I believe you're capable of it. They don't. AmericasVoiceNow.org, Facebook.com/AmericasVoiceNow, YouTube.com/AmericasVoiceNow, Spreaker.com/AmericasVoiceNow, and Google.com/plus America's Voice Now. See you tomorrow. God bless. The only thing necessary for evil to triumph is when good men do nothing.